welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That is Xan. I am Shoob, and today we are here to cover some Big 12 football. We're going to do a crash course on the Big 12 over the next 4 to 8 hours, but these videos will be divvied up into 3 separate conglomerates of 6 to 5 teams each. Today we're going to be covering the sort of eastern teams and the geographically eastern teams of the Big 12, plus the Kansas schools and Iowa State, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Kansas State, West Virginia, and UCF. So a good chunk of the Big 12 here, and this is a conference that I've been looking forward to personally to covering for some time now. I'm ready to get into it. This is our bread and butter, man. The Big 12, I think, is one of our top conferences in terms of expertise, and it's a conference we watch a lot. I'm looking forward to it. How are we doing, man?
Doing pretty good, man. It's always a good day when you get to discuss Big 12 football, and it's a good, passionate fan base, so I'm excited to get rolling.
Let's get into it, man. So today we'll be doing over-under win totals on those teams that I just mentioned, and starting at the top, let's do alphabetical order. Cincinnati, the Bearcats, first up on deck. Scott Satterfield enters his second season at Cincinnati. Tough first year for Satterfield. They went 3-9. They only won one Big 12 conference game last year. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that they didn't beat any of the OG Big 12 teams last year. So they're still looking to get that monkey off their back. It was a sort of a tough year for all the newcomers in the Big 12 last year. But now Texas and Oklahoma leave. You have all those Pac-12 schools that are joining. So a lot of the same, but also a little bit of turnover in the league as well. So Cincinnati's still relatively new to the league. They're going to look to improve upon last season, and the sports books are suggesting that Cincinnati is in store for at least maybe 2 or 3 more wins than they had last year. Their win total line for the regular season is sitting at 5.5 wins. So that would be an improvement over 3-9, of course, and it is even money on both sides. So it's coin flip at 5.5. Xan, what's your take on the Bearcats in year 2 under Scott Satterfield?
Well, I will say this. I do think that their offensive outlook right off the bat is already looking better. Brendan Sorsby coming in from Indiana. I mean, he's a 3-to-1 ratio guy, limited production, but at the same time, their quarterback play has been so abysmal. When you have Emory Jones as your quarterback, you already know what's going to happen. No quarterback play whatsoever. So I already expect a tick up in quarterback play for the Bearcats this year. That's great. And then they also return Corey Kiners, a 1,000-yard rusher. Big time. 2 improvements. Well, at least bringing back a productive guy, an improvement at a key position in quarterback. And then you look at the wide receiver room. The wide receiver room is pretty interesting, Shu, because we look at Xavier Henderson coming back, 800-yard guy. And then you bring in Jamoy Mays from UAB, who's a 1,000-yard guy, and then Tony Johnson from FAU is a 400-yard guy. So there's a little more depth in this group now. But another thing that's really interesting now, when I was looking at this depth chart, is that, well, one name in particular that's really interesting to me is Evan Prater. One guy I was really high on, like coming out of high school, I thought he'd be a pretty good quarterback, a good dual threat. And apparently that just has not panned out at all. He's been a little bit of a bust at Cincinnati, unfortunately. Hate to be wrong about that one. I thought Evan Prater was going to do some big things, but he is projected to be a starting wide receiver for the Bearcats this year, so we'll see what he can do. So that one's also very interesting. And then one thing I kind of noticed with this group, Shub, is that the offensive line has a lot of returners, and they actually grade out pretty respectfully. I think this offensive line is actually going to be a pretty solid unit this year, which is actually going to be playing to the strength of this team. They have a better passing quarterback this year than they have had in recent memory. And so that's going to play to and seeing improvement in this passing game. And that's something that I really like about Cincinnati. I think that we definitely will see an improvement in this offense this year. They're 59th in offensive efficiency last year. I can definitely see them maybe going to like 45th, maybe going a little bit higher. It just depends on, on the obviously the quarterback play. But all of the pieces are there to see improvement with this team. The big part here, Shub, and the big reason that Cincinnati has a lot of weakness is their defense, man. They were 116th in defensive efficiency last year. I know they got a new defensive coordinator this year, Tyson Veit from Iowa State. He was the former assistant head coach over there / linebacker coach. We'll see if he's able to improve upon that defense. But I look at this defense, man, and there's not a lot to be excited about in this defense. This is not the Cincinnati teams of years past, where they had all that NFL talent. They still have Dante Corleone, but is he going to play? I mean, he's got blood clot issues. I mean, he's an absolute beast. He's an NFL draft pick, but I don't know how available he's going to be come this season. But if he plays, this defensive line can at least be a respectable group. Without him, this group is lacking. So they definitely need Corleone to be the centerpiece of that defensive line. The linebackers in general, shoot, they don't grade out very well. There's a lot to be desired at that level. They really need to step up. And then I look back at the secondary, and there's really no one there that sticks out either, except for maybe Mecky Miller, who's a transfer from New Mexico State, who grades out relatively well. So this defense, man, like I mean, you're 116th. I mean, you would think that you would just improve by default. I know you like to say that a lot. Like you're just so bad. There's no way you can be better. I mean, no way you can be worse. And I think that's the way it is with Cincinnati. But I don't know if they're going to be like, I don't know if they're going to crack the top 100. You know, they may not be 116th worst, but I don't know if they're going to crack the top 100. And so that leaves a lot to be desired. So yes, I think there's improvement on the offense, but the defense, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. We'll see. Tyson Fee's got a lot on his plate for year one. They definitely have a lot of growing to do. But let's jump into the schedule, Shoob. This is the big thing. This is what determines all of this. I mean, their line is sitting there at 5.5. What does Vegas think about this team? We talk about it all the time. A team can be better than they were last year, but still not have a very favorable line because of their schedule and vice versa. So we look into it. Towson, that's probably a win. You get Pittsburgh at home. Not as high on Pitt this year. That's a winnable, but I'm not going to just definitively give it to them. Then you go at Miami, probably an L. You go at Texas Tech. I think you probably lose that one as well. Then you go bye week at UCF. I think you probably lose that one. Then you get Arizona State. That one's winnable. You go at Colorado. That one's winnable. You go bye week to prepare for West Virginia. And West Virginia is no cakewalk anymore. They've got a competent quarterback over there. But you at least get a bye week, and you're at home in that game. And these are the kind of games that are going to teeter on whether you're going to hit your win total or not. So I think it's really important that they get West Virginia one at home and one on the bye, so it gives them a chance. I'll say it's a toss-up. And then at Iowa State, I don't think they're going to win that game. Iowa State's a quality team this year. Then you go at Kansas State. I don't think you win that game either. And then you got to finish the year with TCU. At this point, you're kind of licking your wounds. You're hoping you're going to go bowling. I don't know, man. TCU, I'm not as high on as most people are. But I still think TCU is definitely a notch over Cincinnati. And so we're looking at a pretty tough schedule for these guys, man. I mean, I can only maybe definitively give them like one right off the bat, and that's Towson. And then in probables, I say, like Pitt, Arizona State, Colorado. And then maybe they snipe one of these other teams in here. But ultimately, I'm looking at like maybe 5 wins. I'm going under on the Bearcat Shoob, and I'm going to go ahead and give this moderate confidence, 2 points.
2 points on the under, so medium confidence there. Yeah, pretty much share the same opinions here, man. Cincinnati is a team that you think on paper can take a step forward. The question is how much. I agree with you on Sorsby. It's got to be a slight improvement at minimally over Emory Jones and the offensive line. The offensive line is this team's saving grace. I mean, very quietly, it was one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12 last year, and they're going to have to lean on it again this year as well, with Sorsby as well. So I'm looking at the schedule. I'm looking at these teams. Maybe Cincinnati can push around up front, but then if you cover the rest of these teams in the Big 12, I think a lot of the defensive lines in this league, especially a lot of the defensive lines of the teams on their schedule in league play, I think getting a little bit better. So we'll see how that offensive line holds up front throughout the year. But the defense, it's so interesting with Tyson Veet because I looked at his track record and I'm like, okay, I know he's been the assistant head coach, very important guy, very huge stalwart of the Iowa State defense over the in recent years. So he's been a huge part of that. And I think on the surface, it's a pretty good hire by Satterfield. It's his background as a defensive coordinator. I just thought really quickly was very interesting. He's got 5 years of coordinating experience, but he was the defensive coordinator at Muskingum and St. Vincent. So you can try to tell me, you can guess what level that is. I have no idea what the hell that is. Like defensive, what is that? D3? Muskingum? You're on mute, by the way.
That's got to be D3.
Yeah. Muskingum. is not a name of any university or college that I would have guessed out there that exists.
I'm telling you, Shoob, like every now and then I'll hear a name of a college, and I'm like, that's a college somewhere? Like, how many colleges are there in this country? Like,
Well, Tyson Veets coordinated defense at a couple of them, so that's that. But anyways, yeah, I it has to be a little bit better by default. You've already said it for me. So my model is pretty tough on the Bearcats. The model only has Cincinnati at 4.1 wins. It's not like in Cincinnati at all, and that's screaming for a huge underplay here. The thing is that especially with this league where so many of these teams, the bottom is not nearly as bad as the bottom of other leagues, and the top isn't as good as the top of other leagues, that all these teams are very closely related to each other. I look a lot of last year's records for these teams and how they did in one possession games because really these teams are so close to each other that a lot of them are at least close to each other. And I look, okay, how'd you do last year in one possession games? Like, were you really as good as your record said you were? Or were you really as bad as your record said you were? And Cincinnati definitely got the short end of the stick in one possession games last year. They were 1-4 in one possession games last year. So they were probably a little bit better than that 3-9 record for sure. So we'll give Satterfield a little bit of grace here. But the thing is, I still look at the schedule and that non-conference is tricky. It's tricky. Of course, you got Pitt, who you beat last year, but Pitt, I think, just had a really bad year, and they're probably going to be a little bit better this year. I know it's at home, but
Pitt's going
it's
to be
kind of
better
a
this year than they
toss-up.
were last year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a toss-up in my mind. I don't really see these two teams. They're kind of about equal in my mind. Like this is a coin flip for me. And
Hmm.
then Miami of Ohio, we talked about it when I believe it was Northwestern who's got a non-conference game against Miami of Ohio. That's the projected number one team in the MAC.
Hmm.
And Cincinnati's going to go play him at their place at
Yep.
Miami of Ohio. So
That's why
it,
when I was covering it, man, I didn't give it to him right off the bat.
yeah, my model is not giving it to him either. It says it's a toss up. And you look at the rest of the schedule, good, sure, it's good that you got Houston and you got Arizona State at home. Those are two of the weakest teams in the Big 12, if not the two weakest in the teams in the Big 12. Luckily, they got both of them at home. So let's give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you win those games. Let's say you beat Pitt, you got four in the bank there, but then I look at the rest of this schedule and I see the rest of this schedule, all those teams, I believe, is just a rung above you in talent. I just think they're just better overall. And I think the only team, maybe if you're going to go and bite one and pull it off an upset, I would say maybe Colorado is a team maybe you have a matchup advantage against because that's a weak defensive line. Then maybe you can push around up front. It's at Colorado. I mean, it's sort of middle late in the season, so who
Also,
the hell
shoot,
knows
this
where they're going
this
to
is
be at.
assuming that teams like Houston and all that don't end up beating them. This is assuming that they beat the teams that they should beat.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my point. It's like I'm being very optimistic here and I'm struggling to find 6 wins as an overplay here. So I'm going to go under and I'm going to go at it with actually low confidence. So the reason why I didn't go at it with stronger confidence is because one, I do think Cincinnati was a little bit record than their better than their record showed last year, but I I do have confidence in Veet turning around the defense by the fall because he's from what I've heard, he's a good coach. And I think that there's a small chance they can get to a bowl game. I'm not saying it's completely out of the possibility, but I also am struggling to find an overplay here. So this was like a
They're going to have a solid offense, Shube. It's just a matter of can they put the defense together.
yeah, I think what I was getting at with my notes is was like if I could put like 1.5 confidence points, that's what I would do here. So I wasn't quite a medium, but I'm gonna say low confidence, but we'll see. Okay, so moving on to Iowa State. Matt Campbell coming in to his ninth season at Iowa State, 9 years for Matt Campbell. Wow. It's been a good run for him. They were 7-6 last year, and this year they come in with a win total of 7.5 wins on Caesars, a little bit of juice to the over at -135. So bettor's a little bit slightly more optimistic on Iowa State, and Caesars got 7.5 as the win total. That's pretty solid. What's your take on the Cyclones in 2024?
This is a good team, Shube. This is a good team. Iowa State's a team that a lot of people kind of glaze over, and there's like, oh yeah, it's Iowa State. Yeah, we could probably win that game. But if you really like dive in here and you look at the pedigree of the coaching staff, one Matt Campbell, this as you brought up, always finds a way to defy the odds. And then the fact that this team actually from top to bottom is actually pretty dang good. I mean, Rocco Beggs last year was very quietly a very solid quarterback. No one really talked about him, but he put up very solid numbers, 23 touchdowns, 8 picks, 3,100 yards.
And who
And
did
I
he have his
believe
coming out party against?
Oklahoma State, as
The
always,
one team where every Big 12 quarterback has their coming out
every
party
every Big
against.
12 quarterback or every quarterback who like is like the third string and starts for one game always goes off against the Pokes. But anyway, we're here to talk about the Cyclones. Cyclones fans, if you're here, we're here to talk about you. Cyclones. Anyway, Abu Sama also returns. I think he got a little dinged up last year, but he's still very efficient. Over 7 yards per carry. That's something that you absolutely love if you're an Iowa State Cyclones fan. So you've got a solid quarterback who's still young, by the way. I think Rocco Beck, is he a redshirt sophomore or is he a true sophomore?
I think he's a
He's one or
redshirt
the other.
sophomore.
But either way, you still got him for at least 3 more seasons. And then you look off, and then you look at the wide receivers. You've got Jaden Higgins, who I was a little low on at first because he came from a low-level transfer, but he ended up being a beast. He put up 980 yards, 6 touchdowns last year, and he's poised for more this year. You bring back Jalen Noel, 820 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then you bring in Eli Green from North Dakota State, who's another 900-yard receiver. And that's another guy who's going to get mixed into rotation. So, I mean, Iowa State's got some weapons, man. And then you look up on the offensive line, they return their best tackle in they bring in a tackle from named Jalen Travis from Princeton, who grades out very well for PFF, 87 grade, which is like amazing for the tackle position. The rest of the O line is a little bit iffy, a little bit questionable. I think that's going to be the kind of limiting factor to this offense. But overall, man, Iowa State definitely has the pieces to be very effective on the offensive end. It just depends on what they do with that offensive line. We look on the other end, man, and this is where I love Iowa State, man. Defense. Joe Heacock always has a great defense there at Iowa State, and it's not going to change this year. Iowa State's defense is going to be stellar once again. You look at their D-line, man, you return both interior guys, Dominic Orange, J.R. Singleton, both grade pretty respectfully. You return edge rushers, Tyler Oniedem, and you also get Kennard Snyder from the portal, who grades out really well as well from University of Louisiana Monroe. And then they have good depth pieces behind those guys. So this D-line is very good. Like, in terms of the Big 12, this is going to be a top 3 D-line. If I'm an Iowa State fan, you're absolutely going to have one of the best D-lines in the country. Or not country, but probably at least a top 25 D-line and one of the best in the Big 12. Then we look off and you go to the next level. You get Caleb Bacon returning. He's one of the best linebackers in terms of like efficiency, in terms of his grades. And I think that's something that really speaks well. I mean, now you've got a pretty solid front seven going for you right there. You may have lost TJ Tampa in the secondary, but you're bringing back Miles Purchase. You're bringing back Jeremiah Cooper, and you're bringing back Malik Verdon. I mean, Shoob, this is a good team on defense. Iowa State quietly has a very good team this year. And when we look at it, they were 30th in offensive efficiency last year. Nothing but returners and additions to like key skill positions on offense. They could jump into the top 25 very quietly. 17th in defensive efficiency last year. I like them to at least hold that position, if not maybe take a jump. They're at least going to stay in the top 25, Shoob. And when you're top 25 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, you're going to be a dang good team. And that's what I think the Cyclones are this year. They're going to be a dang good team. So you look at the schedule, man. North Dakota, that's a dub. You go at Iowa, and they should beat Iowa because did you see what Cade McNamara did in practice today? Shoob, I sent it to you, but I don't know if you got a chance to see it.
No,
But did you see Cade McNamara's stats in practice today?
oh boy, what were they?
He was 7 of 21, 2 sacks, a pick 6, and like 30 yards or something. It was terrible.
Sounds
this is
about
still,
Iowa.
yeah, exactly. So this makes me think this is very winnable for Iowa State. But the problem is in the Cyhawk game, somehow Iowa State, even when they should win it, they don't win it. On paper, Iowa State should win this game. Iowa State should beat Iowa on paper, even though it's at Kinnick. It should be a dub for the Cyclones. So we're at like 1.5 wins right now. I'm going to go benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say Iowa State is a better, well-rounded team because of those discrepancies with Iowa. And it's still early season too. Iowa's not going to figure it out that quickly. I'm going to say, you know what? Iowa State, you're going to start 2-0. You're going to beat your boys out over there in the country.
Let's go.
Then you go
Little win
bye
streak in
week.
the Cyhawk series.
There we go. Then you go bye week. Arkansas State, dub. Then you go at Houston, bro, you're 4-0. Then you play Baylor, 5-0, man. At West Virginia, I think it could be a little tricky, But who cares? You've already got 5 wins in the bag. We're looking at 7.5 right here. UCF, you at least get them at home. That's going to be one of your tougher games, but it's at home. Then you get a bye week to prepare for Texas Tech, and you're going to be at home. I like that. Between UCF Tech, you're going to get one of them. Okay, that's 6. Then you go at Kansas. You got Cincinnati, Utah, Kansas State. Gets a little tough there. I think you get Cincy. That's 7. And at Kansas, at Utah, Kansas State, between those three, I think you can at least get one of them. That's at least 8. I'm going to go over on the Iowa State Cyclones. It's going to be low confidence. I do like this team a lot. But the only reason it's low confidence is because the teams on their schedule, especially on the later end, are pretty quality teams, Shoob. They're all teams that are going to be playing for a lot at that point in the season. And I think 8-4 is kind of right where the Cyclones are going to be this year.
Very fair assessment. So I'm pretty bullish on this Iowa State team. I love the skill positions. I love Beck returning at quarterback. The offensive line still probably be pretty bad. I mean, it'll be better, but it's still probably gonna be pretty bad. It was in terms of line yards, at least, it was the worst offensive line in the Big 12 last year by a country mile, which is kind of hard to believe. But you know what's kind of gives me some room of optimism for Beck is that the kid played pretty well with one of the worst offensive lines or the worst offensive line in the league last year. Just give that man a little bit more protection up front. And I mean, who knows what the ceiling is there with Beck at quarterback. And as far as the new offensive coordinator, I will it skip a beat at all? I don't really know. I don't really think it will. I mean, Iowa State is definitely a developmental program. It seems like Taylor Mauser being promoted from tight end coach. I don't really know if play calling and if that's going to lead to a huge discrepancy or downgrade at that
That is
spot.
an important point that you bring up, Shoob.
Yeah, but it's like it's different from a guy coming in from externally from a totally different system or running something totally different. Iowa State seems to not skip a beat despite the turnover at that spot calling the plays. So I'm not really worried about that. I see the offense remaining inside the top 30. That's what I wrote in my notes. I think if they're 28th last year, very quietly, think you got to remain inside the top 30. I think if anything, it can get better. And then the defense, it's just you got so much returning, so many plus value defenders returning. I think you can't really poke many holes in this defense. They'll be solid across the board, except maybe depth at linebacker is one of the few things that I can really be like, oh, if you get some injuries at linebacker, maybe you might be a little bit in trouble at that spot. But I think a jump inside the top 30 is very much on the table. I'm actually kind of expecting it. So, you kind of hinted at it. We're saying inside the top 30 offensively, inside the top 30 defensively. This is all the signs are pointing to a pretty good team here that's brewing up in Ames, and the model thinks so. So I want you to guess how many wins do you think my model's got Iowa State at?
9.
9. Well, you're off by just a little too much. The model, you know how I said the model is drunk on Virginia Tech and ACC win
It's
totals?
drunk in Iowa State.
It's drunk on Iowa State. The model loves it some Cyclone juice. It has Iowa State projected for 10.3 wins. Yeah,
Woo-wee!
it
That's a pretty heavy over
loves
there,
Iowa
Shoob.
State. It loves Iowa State. And I couldn't tell you why, because especially some of the teams we've done in the last couple of videos, I've been like, this isn't making sense to me. But it loves Iowa State, so that's all I can tell you. It has Iowa State as a favorite in all 12 games. In
Ooh,
all 12 games, it has Iowa State as a favorite. It has Iowa State at a 70% chance or better to win every single one of those games.
that's
Now,
insane.
that is insane. Do I agree with that? No, I'm gonna pump the brakes a little bit. I think that's a little insane, but for instance, the only games that the model is having Iowa State under a 75% chance to win is at Iowa, of course, and then at Utah and Kansas State. That's it. It says every other game besides those three, you should have an 80% chance or better to win. And while I think that's a little far-fetched, I don't really disagree a whole lot. I'm not going to push back on the model. I mean, you can really make an argument after looking at this team in depth. This could be the most efficiently balanced team in the league. If they can get over those one-score losses, that omen that they've been dealing with in recent years under Matt Campbell, I think 9 to 10 wins is on the table in the regular season for me. Personally, I already bet money on this win total at 7.5. I bet the over on it. I also bet an alternate win total over at 8.5 with some plus money on that. And additionally, I've also taken a futures bet on Iowa State to win the Big 12 at plus 1200 or plus 12 to 1, I should say. And that's gone down a little bit. Now it's like 9 to 1 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm pretty bullish on Iowa State. I'm pretty invested in Iowa State, and I'm calling my shot. Like Babe Ruth right now, I'm calling my shot. I think this is the year where Iowa State gets over those one possession losses. I'm going to say they start winning some of these one possession games, and this is the breakout season for Matt Campbell. I'm bullish on the Cyclones. I just got a feeling here. I got a good feeling about this. I think this is the year for Iowa State, and I see them as one of the top contenders for the Big 12 title in 2024.
You heard it here, folks. Saturday Scholars in agreement. Buy
Yep.
now. Buy your stock now on the Iowa State Cyclones.
Especially after looking at this team in detail. See, I was kind of high on them, but I didn't think I would be as high as I was after doing some more research. That's the thing. So needless to say, my over 7.5 is with high confidence because I've got like multiple futures bets on Iowa State. So high confidence for me on that over 7.5. Okay. Let's go down south a little bit to the west. Let's head to Lawrence, Kansas. The Jayhawks come in with a win total of 8 wins even. Little juice to the over there at minus 140. Lance Leipold in his fourth season at Kansas, and that man has worked wonders for this program. We saw it coming when they first hired Leipold. We both said this is a good hire. This is going to be the one thing that finally turns Kansas football around. And sure enough, that has been the case. And there's a lot of reason for optimism, despite a lot of turnover along the coaching staff underneath him this past year. Lance Leipold has a pretty good team coming back. They went 9-4 last year. The thing is, and cover your ears, Jayhawks fans, this guy's going to be a hot commodity on the coaching carousel at the end of the year. I was slightly surprised that he didn't get poached last year, but I think that especially if they have another good year, you got Jalen Daniels returning a quarterback. If Kansas has another pretty good year, I find it hard to believe that one of these SEC or Big Ten programs isn't going to be throwing money at Lance Leipold at the end of this year, but we'll see. We'll see. But for right now, 2024, what do we got on Kansas?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to like about Kansas, man. I mean, Lance Leipold's a great coach, but the big thing that really sticks out to me, man, well, there's two things about this offense. One that I really, really like, and one that I really, really don't like. The one that I really, really don't like is obviously losing their offensive coordinator, Andy Koltenicky, to
It's a
Penn
big one.
State. That's a pretty huge loss because he spouted the eighth most efficient offense last year, a top 10 offense. And
At
this was with
Kansas.
and this
At
was with Jalen
Kansas.
Daniels. This was with the starting quarterback, Jalen Daniels, going down. This is with
Yep.
Jason Bean as your quarterback, who isn't a scrub, but he's not Jalen Daniels. So that's pretty impressive. The thing I like about this team is there's a lot of returners at those skill positions. Jalen Daniels is back. Devin Neal is back. Devin Neal sports almost 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns. You bring back three wide receivers who are all maybe not the most productive, but all very, very experienced in your system. They have all been there their entire careers, and they are all seniors. We've got Lawrence Arnold, almost an 800-yard guy. You've got Luke Grimm, 550 yards, and then you've got Quentin Skinner, another 600-yard guy. All these dudes have been in the program for a very, very long time. They have that chemistry with Jalen Daniels, this coaching staff, and so I think they're primed to really have a great year and break through and see. I mean, Kansas is one of those wild card teams that could make the Big 12 championship this year, 100%. Look at the offensive line. There's a little bit of concern here because you do return some nice guys like Michael Ford and Bryce Calladay, but you lose Dominic Puny to the NFL. It's kind of hard to lose a tackle who goes in the top 3 rounds and expect to, improve at that position. So they did bring in some transfer help, but we'll see what that looks like ultimately. This offensive line should at least be like a decent group, an average group, but I think they will take a step back from where they were last year. I mean, when you lose, a tackle at a program like Kansas, it's not like you're just replenishing them with another guy who can just step in and be a third round pick. So it's no disrespect to Kansas. Those guys just don't grow on trees. And then moving over to the defensive side of the ball, this is where I have my kind of concerns with Kansas a little bit, Shoob, because I look at their front seven, and their front seven does not stick out to me at all. They did lose Austin Booker to the NFL, but aside from that, man, like this front seven, like I'm really concerned for the Jayhawks on this front seven. Nobody really grades out well. There's not a lot of overall like star power at this spot. They could be very porous here. I'm not very big on their front seven. I can tell by your face you might feel a little bit differently, Shu, but I was looking at these numbers here and I was saying like, man, there's just
Oh,
no one here who I think can really stick out in this front seven, and I think
oh,
that's
I
going to be
agree
a
with you.
huge issue for the Jayhawks. They were 68th in defensive efficiency last year, Shub, and I don't know that that's going to improve. I think they're going to be porous to teams that have a good O line and a good run game. Looking back, though, there is a saving grace in this defense, and that's the secondary. Their cornerbacks return, Mello Dotson, Kobe Bryant, they both grade out pretty well. They returned safety, Marvin Grant, and then they bring in Devin Dye from Utah State, who's a solid like depth guy. So the secondary is pretty solid. It's just that front seven that's a little bit weak. And so we'll see what that looks like. They have their work cut out for them this year. And I don't know, even though there's a lot of talent on offense, I don't know if Jeff Grimes, the man who was fired at Baylor for producing a terrible offense, um, is going to be the guy to get you over the hump. If anything, we're going to find out if Kotelnicki was the guy making these players great, or if these players were already like naturally great and being propelled by Kotelnicki. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Jeff Grimes, he's had his success in the past, but obviously Baylor was not one of those situations. But we'll see, Shub. Let's look at the schedule. Enough babbling from me. Lindenwood's going to be a win. Then you're going to go at Illinois. I lean for Kansas to win this game for sure. You get UNLV. UNLV is not going to be a cakewalk, but UNLV just did lose their starting quarterback to USC. That's probably going to lean in your favor. I'd say win. You start 3-0 if you're Kansas. You go at West Virginia. Gets a little tricky because that is an away game. Then you get TCU. I think between West Virginia and TCU, you could probably take one of those home. And then you get at Arizona State. I think that's winnable for you. Bye week to prepare for Houston. A bye week to prepare for Houston should be a win. Then you go at K-State. That's always tough in the Sunflower Showdown. Bye week, Iowa State. That's big because you get Iowa State, a team that we're very high on, off a bye week and at home. I think that's a huge thing that works for them in their favor. That one I'm going to throw as a toss-up when I would have traditionally probably leaned Iowa State there. Then we'll go at BYU. They should win that game. Colorado should win that game. At Baylor should win that game. So if my math serves me right here, I'm what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know what, Shub? I mean, I like them to at least get 8. The only thing that worries me about this team is if something happens to Jalen Daniels, because he has been getting hurt in the past, and it's not like they have a competent quarterback like Jason Bean in the midst this year, like they did last year. If Jalen Daniels goes down the first 3 weeks again, this over could very well be cooked. And so this is why I'm going to go over on the Jayhawks, but with low confidence, because I mean, if something happens to Jalen Daniels, this over is probably out the way.
Yes, that was going to be my main point here, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is Jalen Daniels' health is clearly a make or break for this team's season. The thing with Jalen Daniels is the room for skepticism here, I think, is that, yeah, he's got some experience. Good college quarterback, played 25 career games, but he's never played more than 9 games in one season. The guy's got a little bit of Tyler Shuck in him. He has not been able to play a full season. He's been around for 4+ years. So is this all of a sudden the season where he stays healthy and plays all 12 games? Well, Kansas better hope so, because like you said, there's no more Jason Bean insurance anymore. That was an incredibly nice luxury that Kansas has had the last few years. And that's why the last 2 years I've been on these overs for Kansas, is because I've known that Jalen Daniels' shaky injury history has always been supplemented. At least you know that you have that insurance policy with Jason Bean, who was one of the best backups in the entire country. And honestly, I'm surprised that Kansas was able to hang on to Jason Bean and that he didn't go and transfer somewhere else in his career there. So good for Kansas for having that backup option, but that's not the case anymore. You have Cole Ballard, who has a little bit of experience, but he's clearly not Jason Bean. Kansas fans know that. If Jalen Daniels gets hurt, that's going to make or break your season. So you better hope that Jalen Daniels stays healthy for a full 12 games. The loss of Colton Nicky at offensive coordinator is huge. I can't stress it enough. I don't care who you replace him with. I actually think Jeff Grimes is a good hire. I think Jeff Grimes that you kind of throw into a tough situation there at Baylor last year. You alluded to it. He's had some good he's had some good reputation in the past. I think it is overall a good hire. Another thing too though is that Jeff Grimes is also going to be co-coordinating the offense with Jim Zabrowski, who's was the co-offensive coordinator last year. So that's at least the guy that is familiar with Colt Nicky's system, which I think could be a good thing. But we'll see. I'm going to be definitely looking into that when I evaluate this team this season. Offensive line play is just a big unknown, but the skill position players are great, as you pointed out earlier. On the defense, love the quarterback duo, Kobe Bryant, Mello Dotson. That's as good of a corner duo as you're going to find starting in the Big 12. The rest of the secondary is definitely the strength of the defense, but as you said, I'm in agreement with you, not high on that front six, not high on it at all. So this is a team that may have some trouble against teams that can run the ball and are big up front. The model has Kansas at 6.9 wins, so a good solid one full win to the under there. They're playing those two home games that'll be at Sporting KC, the soccer stadium, or Sporting KC Soccer Stadium. That's the name of the team that plays there, the MLS team. And then they got those four games at Arrowhead. So kind of like Northwestern, you kind of have at least Kansas not playing in a practice facility, but you're still playing with it's not your home stadium, it's not on campus, so that gives opportunities for opposing fan bases to travel to a big city and fill up an opposing stadium, an NFL stadium, and an MLS stadium. So I wouldn't say that home field advantage is going to be one thing that the Jayhawks can rely on this year. My model, I have them underdogs at West Virginia. I have them as an underdog against TCU, actually. The model likes TCU at Kansas State, and then, of course, against Iowa State. They did get sort of a lighter Big 12 draw, at least. And I say that because they did draw, I think, three of the worst teams in the league. They drew Arizona State, they drew Houston, and they drew BYU, who are, I think, clear cut, probably the three worst teams in the league. So that's a good thing for Kansas, but those other games against those other teams, I just can't say for sure. You can't bank on them winning those games, and I'm gonna have to go under here. And I'll say this, I'm going with under with low confidence, and that is only because I think that if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, so this is one of those teams where I would love to know at the end of the season if you were to tell me, or if you could tell me right now, like don't tell me anything else about what's happens to Kansas this year. If you can tell me Jalen Daniels is healthy all 12 games this year, or Jalen Daniels is hurt again, and Cole Ballard is starting for multiple games this year, I would probably say over with low confidence. I know that Jalen Daniels is playing because you can make an argument he's the best quarterback in the Big 12. But if the guy gets hurt like he has every other year in his entire college career, um, 8 wins is not happening with this schedule. 8 wins is not happening. I'd be shocked if Kansas gets more than 8 wins without Jalen Daniels playing a full season. So that right there is pretty much the reason for my under. So there you go. But can't stress enough, Colton Nicky is such a great hire for Penn State because the guy had Kansas as a top 10 offense this year with a last year with a backup quarterback. That's just insane. I mean, that guy is a magician. So that's a tough one right there. Okay, moving on. How about Kansas State? Let's head out to the Little Apple in Manhattan. The Jayhawks arch rivals. Kansas State sitting with a win total of 9 wins even. Slight juice to the over at minus 140. Chris Kleinman returns for his sixth season at Kansas State. Again, another guy whose name has definitely been floated out there, I think, for other jobs in the Big Ten and SEC, but he's remained there at Kansas State, which is a great thing for Kansas State. And if the Wildcats continue to have success, I feel like a big program may come knocking eventually. I think he's a phenomenal coach. But anyways, 9-4 last year. This Kansas State team, I think, definitely was a good team last year. They lost the wrong games. They lost the wrong games and had the wrong tiebreakers against Oklahoma State and Texas. And they missed out on the Big 12 championship game, even though, in my opinion, I think they were probably the second best team in the Big 12 last year. But they have opportunity to make amends this year. So, what's your take on the Wildcats in 2024 with a brand new young quarterback? It's a fun time to be a Kansas State fan, that's for sure.
I mean, big shocker, man. I mean, Kansas State once again is going to be a good team. I mean, their line's sitting there at 9, so it shows you that the books really respect the Wildcats this year. It is interesting to notice that Colin Klein is not there anymore. We do have Connor Riley, as the offensive coordinator now, who's promoted as from the offensive line coach to being the OC. So we'll see how that one works out for him. But I really do believe in Chris Kleiman. I think he's a great coach. And just the pedigree in general that they've generated over there in the Little Apple. I mean, since the Snyder days, they have always found a way to like get less or get more with less. And now that you have more in terms of like Avery Johnson, who was a highly touted guy coming out of high school, then that just screams, like just so much upward trajectory with Avery Johnson. I'm really excited to see what he can do. Then we have DJ Giddens coming back, another really productive guy, over 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. Then you bring in Dylan Edwards, who had like some pop-off games at Colorado before kind of falling off the back end for a little bit and not really playing at all. So they've got a good little 1-2 punch there. I look over here, and then they have a nice little quiet addition to the wide receiver room in Dante Cephas from Penn State. Really, really like that addition. He didn't really do anything last year because, I mean, he was kind of bearing the depth chart. He got a little dinged up as well, but he's had 1,000-yard seasons in the past. I think that's a very quiet, great get for Kansas State. And then you've got Jace Brown returning, who's a young guy. He had 400 yards last year, so he's looking to take a step up this year. And then, yeah, I mean, what's not to love? You do lose Ben Sinnott to the NFL, but I mean, with Kansas State, it's just kind of reload at the tight end spot. They'll always find a pretty competent guy to play the tight end position over there. They develop those guys really well. I'm not really too worried about them losing Ben Sinnott. And then we look over at the offensive line, and it's the same situation for them. They did lose 2 guys to the NFL off the offensive line. So naturally, we're thinking there's going to be a little bit of a downgrade in play, but I don't think it's going to be substantial. I mean, they brought in Easton Kilty from North Dakota State, great tackle. And overall, I expect the line to take a step back, but it's still going to be a pretty serviceable group. They're very well coached over there in the Little Apple, and this is going to be a good offense. Big shocker. We look over at the other end, and they took some losses on the defensive line, so they're going to have to look some other people to step up. And Detroit, truthfully, their defensive line doesn't grade out that well based on who they've got coming back. So they are really looking for some people to step up here. At the next level, you've got Desmond Purnell returning. He's pretty solid. Then you've got a New Mexico transfer and Alec Marenko coming in, who they're hoping can step up. We'll see. It's kind of iffy with him. And then we look back at the secondary, and you return 2 guys, at least, at the cornerback position with 500-plus snaps. That's very good right there. You've got Garber and Parrish, and they both grade out, okay, relatively respectful, and that's kind of what you need. And then you got a safety in VJ Payne, who returns as well. So at least one thing that's a saving grace for me is, even though there's not really a lot of guys that grade well at certain spots here, Kansas State is just a very well-coached team. They always get more with less.
Their unit metrics look a lot better than individual PFF.
Exactly.
Grades.
They're very well coached. And so it's hard to just look at them definitively and be like, oh, you can't just look and say, like, these guys didn't grade out very well in their D-line. Their D-line's not going to be good. No, not with a program like Kansas State. They're going to find ways around that. I'm sure they realize what their weaknesses are, and they're really good at scheming around it. And that's a credit to Chris Kleiman. That's a credit to the culture they've established over there since the Snyder era. So, I mean, obviously, I have a lot of respect for Kansas State. Let's jump into the schedule. We're going to go UT Martin. That's going to be a win. Then you go at Tulane. That's not the Willie Fritz Tulane that we're accustomed to seeing. And Tulane's lost a lot of guys to the portal because of the Willie Fritz exodus. That should be a win, too. Tulane is not what they were. Then you go at Arizona, which could be tricky. Arizona's a pretty good team this year. They did lose Jed Fish, but they still retained a lot of their talent over there. That could be what.
One thing I want to point out is this is one of the quirks that, I don't know if you've noticed this, that Arizona game is going to be treated as a non-conference game. Because, so if you look at Kansas State's schedule, there's 10 Big 12 opponents. Obviously, you only play 9 conference games, but
they had them scheduled beforehand.
Yeah, and there's another. I think Utah and Baylor are doing the same thing.
Yes, that's their opener, like their Big 12 opener, but it's not a Big 12 opener.
Yeah, they both had each other scheduled as non-conference games a few years ago, and then the Big 12 just let them keep it as a non-conference series because they couldn't fill the schedule when those Pac-12 schools moved over. So just a quirk there. So Arizona, even though it's another Big 12 team, that is not going to be counted as a Big 12 game. So if Kansas State loses this game to Arizona, that's not going to count against them in the Big 12 standings.
Which is quite beneficial because Arizona is pretty solid this year. Then you go at BYU. You should be able to win that. You play Oklahoma State at home, which is huge to get Oklahoma State at home. It's one of the better teams on your schedule. Having it at home is a big deal. Then you get a bye week to go at Colorado. I expect you to win that off a bye week. Then you go play at West Virginia. Could be a little tricky, but I think you're a slight punch above West Virginia. I think that's a game you should win. You get Kansas, which we'll see what Jalen Daniels is looking like at this point in the season. If Jalen Daniels is out, this is a win. If Jalen Daniels is in, this could be this is going to be a boxing match. So we'll see what that looks like. Heavyweight fight or a flyweight versus a heavyweight. We'll see what it looks like come that time of the season. Then you get at Houston. That should be a win. You get a bye week. Then you get AZ State, Cincy, 2 wins. And then you go at Iowa State. I mean, Shoob, they've got a pretty favorable Big 12 draw here, and the fact that you get at Houston, Arizona State, Cincy, I mean, you get those 3 teams in a row right there. So I mean, that's like the bottom of the barrel of the Big 12. That's 3 teams that you're probably going to beat. You get Kansas relatively late too in the season, which you and I were talking about the health of Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels, of course, I think if I'm being honest with you, I don't think he's going to be healthy come that time in the season, and I think that could end up being a very easy win for Kansas State. And then all of a sudden, we're looking at 4 relatively easier games for Kansas State and mix in a bye week, and they're going to go into at Iowa State relatively healthy if things hold out for them. So this schedule is quite favorable, Shub. This schedule is quite favorable, and you're telling me they're sitting there at 9 wins. I struggle to look on this schedule and tell you where they're going to get 4 losses if we're going under. Sure, you might lose to Arizona, you might lose to Oklahoma State, where you might lose to Iowa State. But where are the other losses here? Because you can't tell me all these probables they're going to lose. They're going to win at least one of these probables between the teams I just mentioned. I'm going to go over on Kansas State, and I'm going to do it with low confidence just because I have respect for some of the other teams on their schedule. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go with medium confidence, actually, just because I have so much respect for Kansas State.
I feel that though. You got respect for Kansas State, but you also respect the Big 12 because it's it's not like the Big 10 or the SEC where there's such a huge talent discrepancy. So it's tough to just throw high confidence at a lot of these win totals for these teams because this league is so balanced. But yes, you're totally right about the schedule. They did get a favorable schedule. And again, Arizona is a non-conference game. So yeah, even though that is one of the tougher teams in the league, it's not going to count against you if you lose it. So I guess that's considered a good thing. I guess it depends how you look at it. If they win that game, that's not really going to favor them in any tiebreakers they will have, unfortunately, against Arizona if it were to play out that way, which is going to be it. Which, by the way, if that's plays out that way, that's going to be so odd that knowing that those 2 teams, let's say Arizona and Kansas State tie for second place in the Big 12, and it's one of them 2 to go to the Big 12 championship
It's
game.
technically no tiebreaker.
Technically, there is no head to head because they didn't play each other in league play. So
Yep.
that's going to be, if that specific scenario happens, that's just going to be so weird. But anyways,
Could you imagine if there was like some kind of tiebreaker that like say Arizona beat Kansas State, but there was some kind of tiebreaker in league play that puts Kansas State in over Arizona when they're tied, even though
because
Arizona
of
beat them?
because
Yeah,
of
or vice
other
versa.
head, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be insane.
I mean, that could very well happen. That's the thing. It's Kansas State could get a second tier tiebreaker over Arizona for a Big 12 championship spot, even though Arizona beat them head to head as a non-conference opponent, or vice versa. It's totally on the table. It's one of those quirks with this year, and there's a couple other Big 12 games that are in similar teams that are playing a non-conference game against each other. But anyways, yeah, you drew BYU, you drew Colorado, who I'm not going to put them in the top half of the Big 12. You drew Houston, Arizona State, Cincinnati. Those are 5 of the bottom half teams in the Big 12. I mean, Kansas State lucked out with this draw in the Big 12. And like you said, the fact that they got Oklahoma State at home, that's huge. Arizona, non-conference opponent still, it's at home. That's huge. So I like the scheduling dynamics here. And as far as the team itself, there's just a lot of upside with Avery Johnson. And I looked at in detail at this quarterback situation here, and I was looking at this and I was like, all right, so what is going to be the difference with Avery Johnson versus Will Howard, who's now the quarterback at Ohio State? Well, Will Howard, completion rate last year just slightly above Avery Johnson. However, if you look under the surface, Will Howard 9.2 A dot average depth of target, Avery Johnson 9.5 A dot. Will Howard 70.5 adjusted completion percentage, Avery Johnson, 71.9 adjusted completion percentage. So pretty much about the same. But if you look under the hood, you make an argument in smaller sample. Avery Johnson was just slightly of a better passer than Will Howard if you adjust for drops and things like that. So I gotta say is the quarterback position, man, Kansas State fans know this. We're preaching to the choir here, but if you're not a Kansas State fan, you listen to this, they might be better off at quarterback this year. I mean, and Avery Johnson's a true sophomore, so he's got the talent to progress with his game. So if Avery Johnson is the truth, it's going to carry this team. But offensive line may take a step back, which may pose issues. Skill positions, I think slight downgrades. Even though I'm praising Avery Johnson here, I don't think you're going to finish 10th overall in efficiency. I think the talent around Avery Johnson took a step back, even though Avery Johnson may pose an upgrade at quarterback. I think overall you may fall out of the top 10, but it could still remain a top 20, top 25 offense. I think that's what we're going to see here. And then as far as the defensive line and secondary, definitely the strengths of this team on this side of the ball. Linebacker room is the only question for me. And just because of the pedigree and what we know about this coaching staff, I could see the defense jumping in the top 10, top 15 this year. Probably top 15, I'd say. I think that's where Kansas State's defense will fall this year. I think it'll be pretty solid. So kind of like Iowa State, you got a team here that I think could finish inside the top 20, both offensively and defensively. It's a pretty good team. It's a pretty good team. They got a favorable schedule. My model only has them for 8.9 wins, which actually is pretty much right on the dot to this line. But if you look at the intangibles here and you look at the schedule, the model I have them favored in 10 out of the 12 games. The only toss-ups are Arizona and Iowa State. I don't have them as a significant underdog in any game here on the schedule. I gotta say, they were 1-4 in one possession games last year. Like I hinted at earlier at the beginning of the segment, this is a team that I think is in store for a little bit of a minor win improvement this year. So I'm going to go over, and I'm going to go at it with low confidence for pretty much the same reasons that you were saying right before you gave your confidence assessment. It's more of a respect for the rest of the league, and I'm not completely sold on the rest of the offense around Avery Johnson. I think they're not quite as good around him as they were around Will Howard last year, but overall, it's a step forward in my opinion, and schedule is favorable. So that's why I'm over here with low confidence at 9 wins. So this is for sure a Big 12 championship contender.
Absolutely, Shoob.
Okay, let's head down to Orlando. UCF, the Knights, entering their second season in the Big 12 with a win total of 7.5 wins, even money on both sides, according to Caesars. Head coach Gus Malzahn, his fourth season at UCF. They were 6-7 last year, a little bit of a slight disappointment of a year for UCF in their first year in the Big 12. They definitely had some big games where they had a couple blowouts there, and they definitely had games against like Oklahoma State. That was a big win there. And then they played Oklahoma tooth and nail to the very end. And honestly, I think they should have won that game against Oklahoma. You and I both watched that game. So UCF was a team that I think personally was a little bit better than their 6-7 record showed. And they're a team that overall, just program trajectory wise, I think is very much capable of becoming one of the top tier teams in the Big 12 if they keep it up with what they're doing on and off the field. But we're grading win totals for this season. So, what is your assessment on UCF with a win total of 7.5?
It's an interesting team, Shoob. We got new coordinators for UCF this year. We got Tim Harris coming in as from that being the running back coach over at Miami, and then you bring in Ted Roof, who was just fired as defense coordinator at Oklahoma. So that's going to be interesting to see how this new dynamic works with these new coordinators. And then you got a new quarterback in KJ Jefferson, which I think is also very interesting. Because KJ Jefferson, we know that, I mean, there were times when he was at Arkansas where he was basically their entire offense. And then, last year, he took a little bit of a step back, but he's still a good player nonetheless. Then you've got, here's my favorite part of the offense, Shoob. Here's my absolute favorite part. You've got RJ Harvey, a 1,400-yard rusher with 16 touchdowns. And then you've got insurance here. You've got a 1-2 punch because you got Penny Boone from Toledo, 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns. You've got a two-headed monster there. You've got possibly two NFL running backs right there if you're UCF. So you've got to be absolutely elated if you've got that. Then you've got KJ Jefferson, a guy who can. Let me just say this: I think they're going to run a lot of options because you got a guy who can run as well, and big, powerful guy like KJ Jefferson. They're going to pose a lot of threats. You look at wide receivers, you lose Javon Baker to the NFL, but you at least bring back Kobe Hudson, who's a very, very good receiver. You bring back Xavier Townsend, who looks to step up a little bit this year. And we'll see. That loss of Javon Baker is certainly going to hurt them, though. So we'll see, man. I do think, in terms of this, though, when we see KJ Jefferson versus John Rice Plumlee, would you say it's an upgrade? Would you say it's a downgrade? Would you say it's more of the same? And it's kind of hard to tell because I think KJ Jefferson has a higher ceiling than John Rice Plumlee when he's playing at his best, but it remains to be seen if he's going to hit that capacity. Overall, I think it's maybe a slight improvement to John Rice Plumlee, but we'll see, man. We'll only see once we get into the season. But it's definitely an intriguing unit. We look at the offensive line. Amari Kite returns. He's their best graded guy on that group. But overall, it's a lot of new starters and transfers in the depth and their rotation for the O-line. So in terms of their offensive line, I don't have a lot of confidence that their offensive line is going to be significantly better than it was last year. If anything, it might be average at best. So KJ Jefferson might have to do a little more running than he's hoping to do this season. So we'll see, man. And then another thing, we talk about health of quarterbacks, man. KJ's gotten beat up a little bit over the last few seasons. If he gets hurt this year, UCF's win total could tank here. Because, I mean, RJ Harvey, Penny Boone are great and all, but if you don't have anyone to throw the ball to Kobe Hudson, he's basically the alpha dog there. Or create a dynamic, dual threat, like with a option kind of thing that I imagine they're going to run with KJ Jefferson. It's going to get rough. And I think they're going to use him often. And I just have this, I don't know why, man, but I just have this feeling that like KJ Jefferson's going to get hurt at some point. I don't wish that upon him, but I don't know. I just feel like it's going to happen. So that's something that's kind of lingering in my mind as I think about this win total. And then I go back and I look at the defensive side of the ball. I see Lee Hunter coming back. I see Ricky Barber coming back, which is really nice. Malachi Lawrence comes back. They add transfer Dalen Dotson from UT Martin, who also grades well. They bring in Nyleik Kelly from Miami, who was a 95 grade out of high school. So they've got some pieces there on the D line. I think they're going to have a pretty serviceable and good D line, especially for Big 12. For Big 12 rankings, I think they'll have a top 5 D line in the Big 12. So that'll be pretty nice. And then you look back, linebackers, not really battle tested, a bunch of transfers there, but there certainly is potential. It's hard to gauge what they're going to have at that level, given that there's not a lot of grades out for these guys. And then we look back at the corner position, and I'm not as high on their secondary this year, Shoob. Traquan Fagans is projected to start, and that man is already, I think he's on his 3rd transfer now, and he has failed to like crack the starting lineup everywhere he's gone, except for here at UCF. They return Brandon Adams, who has an okay grade as in defensive coverage, but ultimately, I think there is a little bit to be desired in the secondary. I will say, though, at the safety position, I really like the addition of Sheldon Arnold from Eastern Tennessee State because, I don't understand some of the transfer portal ratings, man, because he was an 85 grade in the transfer portal, but per PFF, he's the #1 rated safety in college football, the most efficient safety in all of college football, Sheldon Arnold. So that's interesting to me, and UCF got him. So we'll see if he ends up playing. And then they got Damari Henderson come back, and then they added depth from Byron Threats and Cincy. So there's at least some good stuff on the back end. But overall, I think this defense has the ability to be a respectable group. They were 70th in defense efficiency last year. I think they have the potential to potentially go into the top 50. If they do that, they're going to be cooking with grease, really. And mainly, my whole opinion of this team, Shoob, I'll just wrap back around, is just health. Similar when we were talking about Kansas, health. If KJ Jefferson can't stay healthy, I don't know what's to become of this team. Because really, truly, I think the drop-off is going to be there. I'm not saying that their backups are bad, but their backups are not going to be KJ Jefferson with his experience and his pedigree right off the bat. But we'll look at the schedule because the schedule decides win totals. We're sitting here at 7.5 Shoobs. We need 8 to go over. We've got New Hampshire and Sam Houston right off rip. That's 2 wins. Count them. You go at TCU. That's a toss-up. I think that's winnable, though, for UCF. Then you get a bye week to prepare for Colorado, but you're at least at home in this game. I think you win that. Then you got to go at Florida. And by this point in the season, Florida's probably going to be a little upset because how difficult their schedule is. So Florida's going to be coming at you pretty hard. Um, I don't know that they win this game against Florida. It's in the swamp. I think it's a little rough. I think Florida can win this game. I'm not going to go UCF on this one. Then you get Cincinnati at home. You should win that game. Then you go at Iowa State. Could get a little rough for you, given that Iowa State is a very, very well balanced team. BYU should win. Arizona could be a tough one. Arizona State, you should win. You get a bye week to go at West Virginia, which is big because West Virginia is one of those middle tier teams that's going to be fighting for a lot of these positions with these win totals. And then you finish with Utah. It's gonna get a little tough out here, man. I mean, I'm looking here and I see teams that could potentially beat them being TCU, Florida, Iowa State, Arizona, West Virginia, and Utah. I'm counting six right there, potentials. So, do you win enough of these probables to get 8 wins? I don't know, Shoob. And just because they lost so many one possession games last year, and this team is so dependent on KJ Jefferson, I think I'm going to lean 7-5, and I'm going to go under with one confidence point. I think UCF is a sleeping giant. I think they will be one of the best teams in the Big 12 here in the next 5 years or so, if not sooner. But I don't think it's going to be this year.
Very fair points. Yeah, I think with UCF, you already talked about the running back room. I just want to say, shout out to UCF for assembling probably one of the best running back rooms in all of college football,
They've
not
got
just
like
the
the
Big 12.
Avengers in their backfield, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, other than Ohio State, I mean, you can't really match against what Ohio State has at the top there. But in terms of one, two, three, that running back room for UCF that they have, bringing in Penny Boone and having RJ Harvey coming back, I mean, that is a darn good running back room there. KJ Jefferson is just he's a perfect scheme fit for the Gus Malzahn offense. That's of course why he transferred there. Shocker. But I remember when this first happened, I was like, ooh, that's a nice one. I like this a lot for KJ Jefferson. The question is, will this be more of a good thing for KJ Jefferson or for UCF? And I know at the beginning you were trying to compare him to John Reese Plumlee, which I think is actually a very good comparison because John Reese Plumlee, we were high on him last year, but then remember we were like, if he gets hurt, this team it's not good for UCF. Sure enough, JRP got hurt and they went down to Timmy McLean. And I mean, he was okay, but was not JRP. It's pretty much kind of same story, rinse repeat. You're kind of having the same assessment here with KJ Jefferson. But let's say this: if KJ Jefferson does stay healthy for all 12 games, it is going to be an upgrade at the quarterback position compared to the totality of what they had last year. So we can at least go with that. Offensive line should be very solid again. It was slightly above average last year in the Big 12. I think it'll be very solid again. And that's, of course, a very big component of this Malzahn offense and running the ball. And then defensively, defensive line should be very solid and improved. You already talked about that. Back end is pretty portal heavy, and it's pretty hard to judge, if I'm to be honest. The back end, I think, is where the most question marks are just because they loaded up with transfer portal talent. And usually, I think when you go and you look at these teams and you see areas or units of one side of the ball where the coach just loaded up on portal transfers, it means that the coach was not very confident in that unit or that unit's not very good. And so they're having to desperately fill it with portal ads and hoping those guys end up panning out. But anyways, meat and potatoes here. Bottom line, my model has UCF at 7.3. So almost right on the nose with this win total. And I pretty much agree with the model. You have to think this team will be better than last year. It's just the problem is I don't believe those scheduling dynamics are very favorable. I think they're unfavorable. And my toss-ups, I'll try to count them out right upright this time. So my most the toss-ups that I have and the tougher teams that UCF plays, the thing is that I was looking at was most of those games are away. So you have TCU, you have Florida, you have Iowa State, you have West Virginia. All of those are away, and then you have Utah at home. That's nice you got Utah at home, but those first four teams, all those are away. Those are all of your toss-ups and teams that are a little bit better than you or just as good as you. Four out of those five of that batch are away. I don't think that is very favorable. However, I do think that 7-5 seems like the most likely outcome to me. I think 7-5 seems like the most likely outcome here. a little bit tougher of a schedule, a lot of tougher away games. KJ Jefferson health is a huge component here, of course, but I'm gonna say low or not low, under 7.5 with low confidence. So give me that 7-5 record, and if they go 8-4, I wouldn't be totally surprised. But I'm gonna say 7-5 is more likely than 8-4, so I'm gonna go under with low confidence, just like you. Okay,
Copying my homework, Shoob.
pretty much copying your homework. If I'm looking at the board here so far, we are, well, not completely in agreement on everything, but
I think you made great points about Kansas.
that one I think I could have gone with a little bit higher confidence there. I feel a little bit more better about that one now that I've gone through more of these teams. But anyways, last but certainly not least for this video, West Virginia, the Mountaineers come in with a win total of 7 wins even, just a slight hair to the under at -120 on Caesars. Neil Brown enters his sixth season, and Zan, Neil Brown is one of the rare head coaches who
Who
survives a
saved his
hot seat.
job.
Yep.
Yeah.
He saved his job. I think everybody and their mom thought that he was going to get fired last year.
I thought he was out. Yeah.
Pretty much everybody did except Neil Brown apparently, and that man coached his team to a 9-4 record last year. Did not see that coming. Did not see that coming. A very pleasant surprise for West Virginia. Their fans definitely deserve that season. But now you're coming into 2024. The hot seat has definitely cooled off a good bit here with Neil Brown, but things turn over. West Virginia did not get a very favorable scheduling draw from the Big 12. I think they got arguably the worst scheduling draw from the Big 12. But there are some reasons for optimism. Of course, you got Garrett Reed returning at quarterback, and this defense has opportunity to improve. But Zan, I'll let you take it away on the X's and O's here with the roster. What do you got on the Mountaineers?
I mean, we saw such a great improvement with the Mountaineers last year. I think the biggest thing was Garrett Green kind of having his whole emergence. We've been waiting to see, someone take a step up for the Nears, and Garrett Green was absolutely the guy to do it. He had 4-1 on ratios last year, man, and he's a true dual threat guy. I only like him to get better. Garrett Green was honestly probably the saving grace of Neil Brown. Neil Brown's got like a whole shrine to Garrett Green in his garage at home, I'm sure, because that man saved his job. But then we also look at the halfbacks. I mean, they've got two really good running backs in Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson, who are both 800-yard rushers. They've got two guys, just like we are talking about UCF. I mean, they're not quite UCF running backs, but I mean, these are still solid running backs nonetheless. I look at their wide receiver group though, and that's where I draw a little bit of concern though, because there's not a lot of production here, man. They brought in a transfer Jaden Bray from Oklahoma State, who's had his moments, but ultimately he's always dinged up, he's always hurt. And then you've got Hudson Clement coming back, you've got Preston Fox. These are two guys who have been in the program and both, just sub 500 in yardage. You don't have an alpha dog there. You don't have anyone who's really going to like take the top off the defense or like really help keep the threat going to help take pressure off of Garrett Green and these running backs. So that's something that's a little bit of concern for me. And then I look at the offensive line, and Zach Frazier went in the second round, so obviously that's going to hurt them. You bring back your tackle Wyatt Mylan, who's pretty dang good, but the rest of the line, when you consider losing Frazier, they just don't grade out well. There's not a lot of like replacements there that really give me confidence in this offensive line. So that's a concern for me. I think if anything, this offensive line may be a tick below average, but I don't think it's going to be awful. But we'll see, man. The proof will be in the pudding. Now we look at the defensive side of the ball, man. Defensive line, I think actually looks pretty decent here. You've got Fatoma Mubal coming back. You brought in TJ Jackson from Troy, who grades out pretty well. And then you also bring in Ty French from Gardner Webb, who gets some respectable scores. And there's also some guys who've been in the program there who have some experience and some snaps that are going to get a little bit more play now and can hopefully improve a little bit. So I think their defensive line will be respectable. And then you look up at the next level, linebackers are mostly young guys and mostly unproven. So there's really no knowing what's going to happen with this group. They could play really well. They could not. They were 52nd in defensive efficiency last year. It's not horrible. But of course, if you're a Mountaineers fan, you definitely want to see that improve a little bit, especially because their offense was top 30. So we definitely want to see improvement and get more balanced if we're going to compete with teams like Kansas State and the Iowa States of the world, as we covered in this video. On to the back end, cornerbacks, safeties, big part of, basically not getting thrown on top of. They bring in Hollis Garnett from Northwestern. He grades out pretty decently. They bring in Aiden Grimes from Duquesne, who grades out amazingly, albeit versus much lower level competition. But they have good depth behind those guys as well. So there's a good little group of corners that they have rotating in, and I like what they have there. They've got safety Anthony Wilson returning. They've got Jaheim Joseph coming in for Northwestern, who grades out well. I think the secondary will be the strength of this defense. They've got a decent little D line there that could produce some pressure to create some work for the secondary. I think this could definitely stay as a top 52nd or higher defense where they are now. So that's something that I think is a good saving grace for the Nears. My big concern, man, is just like the lack of continuity completely on the O line, as well as just no alpha wide receivers to really help out Garrett Green. No one to take the top off, no one to do anything like that. And so in teams with better defense, better secondaries, it's going to be a little bit tough, especially teams with really good D lines. And you want to talk about teams with really good secondaries and really good D lines, they start with Penn State, man. And they gave Penn State a pretty good run last year, or at least early on they did. And this year, I don't think it's gonna go their way again. I think Penn State's gonna beat them. Then they're gonna beat Albany. You're gonna go at Pitt. I think they should beat Pitt. They're a better team than Pitt. Kansas could be a toss-up. We'll see what Jalen Daniels' situation's looking like then. If Jalen Daniels is healthy, I think this could very well be a loss for the Nears. And then we go bye week to prepare for Oklahoma State. That's big because you're going at Oklahoma State and it's off, and you're getting a bye week to prepare for these guys. So that's big because that's one of the toughest teams on your schedule. I think that's a toss-up. That's definitely a winnable game given the circumstances. Then you get Iowa State, and then Kansas State, and then at Arizona. You're going through the gauntlet right there. You're going at Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona. That is a gauntlet right there of those four teams. I think you're lucky if you get two there. So I'm thinking maybe like you start 3-0, you might lose to Kansas, and then you're 5-3 coming up to your next bye week. You get Cincy and Baylor, both winnable games. I think you can get maybe 7 right there, but then you got UCF and Texas Tech. And then it gets a little tough because I expect both those teams to also be improved. UCF, if you get them late season and say KJ Jefferson's hurt, that could really work in your favor. But we're also thinking in terms of what about Garrett Green? If Garrett Green gets hurt as well, there's a lot of teams that don't really have a secondary option here. If Garrett Green goes down, what happens to the near season? So, Shoob, I really do like the Mountaineers. I really want to see them be successful, but their schedule is rough, man. They really did probably, like as you mentioned and preluded to, they really did probably have the worst Big 12 draw in terms of playing all the top teams in that group. I mean, they're lucky they didn't get Utah, but aside from that, they're playing all the bigger teams in the Big 12. And for that reason and that reason alone, man, I'm going to go under for the Nears, but it's going to be with low confidence because I do think they have the potential to turn some heads and at least push at 7 and go to 8. But I'm going to say I think 7-5 is perfect. And I think 6-6 is probably more likely than 8-4, but it has nothing to do with this being a lack of quality in the team. I think they're actually going to be a pretty solid team, but their schedule's just a little brutal, man.
Amen on that. So you talked about Neil Brown having a Garrett Green shrine in his garage. Well, I'm gonna do a little glazing of my Garrett Green shrine really quick. So listen, Garrett Green was definitely a PFF favorite right here. He graded out as an elite dual threat quarterback, of course. He was one of the better deep ball throwers in college football, believe it or not. He was right up there with some of those guys like Shedeur Sanders and Michael Penix in terms of quality of deep ball throws when he did throw them. He was kind of in that bucket, not quite, but I was just kind of surprised to see that. I knew he was mainly known as a dual threat guy, but he can throw the deep ball a little bit. He's not any pushover for sure when he's throwing the ball downfield. And then of course he graded out as the third best running quarterback in college football last year. The only two guys he was behind were the Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels and Riley Leonard. That was it. Jaden Daniels, Riley Leonard, Garrett Green. I mean, that's pretty good. West Virginia definitely, I think, hit a little bit of a mini jackpot here with Garrett Green taking a huge step forward last year. And I think as long as he stays healthy, even despite some of the questions at wide receiver, I still think the offensive line could improve this year. And I think that this offense could jump in the top 25. I think if you get a full healthy season of Garrett Green. Defensively, definitely a lot more question marks. You got a lot or lack of experience returning in the back end, which is a big question mark for me. It's hard for me to see massive improvement on that side of the ball with all those question marks there. But it's the bottom line, man, is you already talked about it, the schedule. My model has 6.2 wins for West Virginia, so a little bit of almost a full win away from the line there at 7. They drew the toughest schedule of all the Big 12 teams. Their non-conference is tough as well. I mean, Penn State and at Pitt, yeah, I think you are a little bit better than Pitt, but I mean, it's a rivalry game. It's the backyard brawl. I think Pitt might be coming for you for that revenge. It's at Pitt, of course. So worst case scenario, you're starting the season out 1-2 in non-conference play, and that's obviously not where West Virginia wants to be. But on the same token, I do think there is a small chance they can pull off the upset against Penn State, and that is only because I think it is an advantage that they get Penn State early because Penn State's losing a lot along the offensive line, and as much as we like Colton Nicky at offensive coordinator, I'm wondering if there will be a little bit of an adjustment period at the beginning of the season for Penn State. So I do think if you're going to get Penn State, you're going to get them early, and they are at home. Keep in mind, last year it was at Happy Valley. This year it's in Morgantown. I'm still going to pick Penn State in that one, but I do think that has upset potential there. So I'm not just completely counting out the Mountaineers in that one. But needless to say, I think most likely West Virginia goes 2-1 in that non-con slate. You probably lose to Penn State, even though I think you pull off the upset, and you probably beat Pitt, even though I do think there's a chance Pitt could pull off the upset as well. So a little give or take there. And then the rest of the schedule, yeah, you already went through it. I have them as underdogs against Penn State, against Iowa State, against Kansas State, and at Arizona. I have toss-ups versus Kansas, at Oklahoma State, versus UCF, and at Texas Tech. Two-thirds of the schedule I have as underdogs or toss-ups for West Virginia. Lines at 7. I mean, I can't reasonably go over when I have two-thirds of your schedule marked as a toss-up or you as an underdog in. I mean, it's tough proposition to go over 7 wins here. Another thing too is that yes, they did go 9-4. They were all last year. They were 3-1 in one possession games last year. So maybe just a shooting a little bit just above their skis last year. I think that West Virginia is more likely to go 6-6 than they are to go 8-4. But I do think 7-5 is a solid middle ground here. But I'm gonna go under 7 wins. I'm actually gonna go with medium confidence, and that's only because I like the push insurance as 7 even. So I'm gonna go at this with medium confidence because of how difficult the schedule is and the way that I have them or who I have them as toss-ups and underdogs against.
And
So
Shoob, Vegas is showing the Nears a lot of respect because you're having a line of 7 with this schedule. That's respect. Vegas is definitely showing you some respect right there.
for sure, yeah, I have them as one of the top half power rated teams in the Big 12, but I don't know if they're going to finish in the top half just because of the scheduling draw. That's what remains to be seen. But yeah, classic case of the team. The team may honestly end up being a little bit better than last year, but may finish with a worse record, or it might be just as good as it was last year and finish with a worse record. College football, in a nutshell, and these win totals, we do these all the time. We do this for every Power Four team. A lot of these are simply schedule driven, and that is the case here with West Virginia. We're both going under on the Nears, but it should still be a pretty solid team, and I think we both agree they'll still go bowling. All right, man. That covers the first portion of the Big 12. The next two, we got 10 teams to do in two different videos. The next set of teams will be all of the Texas teams plus Oklahoma State. So a lot of the bread and butter of the Big 12, a lot of the OGs in that this next video. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're a fan of one of these teams, let us know in the comments what you guys think. We put a lot of effort and energy and time into doing our prep work and our analysis of these teams and put a lot of work in these videos. So please leave a like and leave a comment. Let us know what you guys think. We love interacting with you. And as always, keep it respectful. So let us know what you guys think. All right, Zan, we will take a short break and we'll be back for the next video. See you guys later.
Saturday scholars on the mic, breaking it down so right. Their analysis hits the target, prediction accuracy so razor tight. Bank account on the rise with each winning call. Not here for hot takes, just the facts, that's all. Getting out, shooting snacks and zany bars, a treat for each week. College football fans rejoice, find what you seek. Hidden gem in the podcast world, they know all. Saturday Scholars Anthem, standing tall and tall. Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your back. The Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your back. Oh, oh. Getting out, shooting snacks and zany balls, a treat for each week. College football fans rejoice, find what you seek. Hidden gem in the podcast world, they know all. Saturday Scholars Anthem, standing tall and tall. Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your back.